Breaking news, this just in. Jesus Christ, the one claiming to be the Messiah, has just informed us that he must die. I don't know what this means. What now? Who is he? Really?
You are the truth in the world filled with lies. What's real is disguise. My eyes been blinded to truth. Mind set on demise. Oh, please hear my cries. Lord, open my eyes to truth. You are the truth. You are the
The word that Don, I'm still stuck on Don's word. Have we become so familiar that we're unfamiliar? What? That is not just a word, that's an indictment. That's an indictment. Like, we should have been on our faces, all of us. But we are seeing the fruit of that word. It's just, wow, that's something to think about. So why are we like this? Why are we like this? Why are we like this, Lord? The enemy we know he's not like low on tricks. There are all kinds of ways that he's looking and lurking to deceive the people of God. Right? There's all kinds of ways. But I think at the core of those things, the core of those ways, I think pride and fear always go hand in hand. They always go hand in hand, right? And they manifest themselves in different ways. So I'm going to ask you by the Spirit of God just to try to keep a circumspect heart so that you can be honest about how those things come at you. How those things show up in your heart, in your mind, in your life, right? Either in fear or pride. Now I'm gonna be kind of frank with you. And again, I'm gonna put some shortening in this so that we're not here another hour or so. Although I wouldn't mind that. I know a few of y'all wouldn't mind, but it may just be a few of us in here. But the devil, he makes me sick. He makes me sick. And he almost had me. He almost had me. That joker almost had me, yo. I remember as a kid having from toddler, having a lot of confidence and being sure of myself. And this may not sound very spiritual to some of y'all. All right, this may not make me look like, I'm qualified to be a pastor per se. Right? But I began to struggle at a certain point in my life as a young kid with the fact that although I was the firstborn child in my home, although many times many people called me the spitting image of my father, who was a great man I have a lot of respect and honor for, right? He's 6'1". Some of you may know where I'm going. I'm talking about little, young, 4 years old. My younger brother, who I also have a lot of love and respect for, started to sprout up past me. And people would often make comments when they saw us, and they would really gear their questions or comments to him because he was taller. In their minds, he was the oldest. He was, the oldest child was the spokesperson for the family many times, right? So they would say something to him, and I would have to speak up, step up, hey, hold up, man, hold up. Hello. And that little simple thing, my pops got, my brother got my pop's height, I got my mother's height. She's all of 5'1", if that. Love her to life. Thank you, Mom. The enemy used that simple thing, though, to plant a seed of insecurity in my heart. And at the root of the insecurity is pride. It's just pride and fear And this feeling like I had to prove myself to people. I had to fight for recognition. I had to consider someone else, what they may think of me or say about me, so I had to show up before I could even give them the chance to misrepresent me. And this also, in many ways, planted this seed that I would say, the seed of insignificance. Insignificance. Now, I wonder, have you ever struggled with this thought? I would expose it as a lie of insignificance. Like, your life doesn't have meaning, and maybe that sounds really deep and heavy and philosophical, but let me unpack it just for a minute. Because I believe the enemy uses circumstances of things that happen to us or things that happen through us or in our lives, words that have been spoken over us, right, to paint this facade or this picture. So I begin to feel like, well, maybe my dad, loves my brother more because he got the height. Now, you may be wondering, what's the big deal about height? Well, in a family like mine, my father was an athlete, my brother's an athlete, I was an athlete-ish. Played, talked, watched, right? But I was on the bench more than on the court. I put it like that, And I begin to tell a different story in my mind and in my heart. Now, again, that was me as a kid. I wonder, has something been spoken over you? Or maybe it's not that deep. Maybe it's as simple as you've lost a job. You've lost a business opportunity. Or there was a lie that was said about you. Or perhaps you were betrayed. Somebody who you trusted turned their back on you. The enemy uses all of these different things to paint his own picture of significance in our hearts and in our minds. And today, in this study of the Gospel of Mark, we read about a man who was struggling with significance. We read about how Jesus approaches this man and how Jesus brings a sense of restoration and value to how he saw himself. Now, if you were here last week, we left in this verse that really sums up the whole Gospel of Mark, from Mark chapter 10, verse 25. And it simply says, Jesus says this, "For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." I'm going to say it again. This is such a core and foundational verse for us to keep in mind, and really that this whole book is centered around. He says, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." And we talked about this quote that I borrowed from Tim Keller that says, real life-changing love is substitutionary sacrifice. All real life-changing love is substitutionary sacrifice. This is where many folk with our modern way of thinking about ourselves, thinking about love, this is where we get messed up. We get held up with the truth and the power of the gospel when Jesus himself said he gave his life as a ransom for many. That word there, for, the preposition in the Greek means in the place of. In other words, they were supposed to die, but the Son of Man came, and instead of them dying, he said, I was going to die. What many hear when they see that and when they read that is a concept or a mindset that the ancients used to have about God. And let me be clear when I say about God. I mean the many gods, lowercase g gods. The gods that demanded blood. They demanded a blood sacrifice. They were bloodthirsty. But this demand was not redeeming in nature. So they place our God, Jehovah God, in that same category of just an angry God who was upset and decided to kill his own son. Who wants to serve a God like that? But Keller reminds us that all real, life-changing love is substitutionary sacrifice. A substitutionary sacrifice. I love how Keller says this. He says, while ancient people did not understand the grace and love of God, modern people do not grasp the justice and the holiness of God. Jesus' death, therefore, was necessary. It was necessary. Otherwise, it would have been completely wrong. It is A, pointless, or B, wicked to sacrifice your life unless it's absolutely necessary to save another. Now, here's an example. If I was to say to you, I love you so much, I'm gonna go to the Belle Isle Bridge and jump in the Detroit River. And I jumped in the Detroit River and drowned and died. Would you feel my love for you? You would think I was crazy. And I would be verifiably so, right? But if someone was drowning and I decided to jump off the Belle Isle Bridge into the Detroit River in order to save them, and I did that saving them, but I drowned, could you understand that as an act of love? See, again, all real life-changing love is substitutionary sacrifice. Now, Jesus is really responding to a question that he is asked by two of his disciples. You remember this, right? James and John asked Jesus something that's pretty wild. And they set up their question with this. They say, Jesus, first of all, can you do for us whatever we ask you? And Jesus does not rebuke them. But he takes it as an opportunity, really, for them to see the own wickedness of their own hearts, right? And they say, we want to sit next to you when you come into your kingdom. We want to be on your left side and your right side. Meet James and John. This is his boys. This is his inner circle right here, right? But Jesus was talking about his theology of glory, his concept of sacrifice, and get this, his concept of serving, and they are showing him their concept of glory, their concept of serving. It's prominence, it's prestige, it's power. They want to be next to who looks like they're in power. That's their view of it. Jesus shows them what real power is, what real sacrifice and humility is in this following story. Verse 46. Verse 46. This is where we land today. You may have heard about this gentleman. His name is Bartimaeus. Bartimaeus. In verse 46 of Mark chapter 10, it says, and they came to Jericho. And as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a great crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stopped and said, call him. And they called the blind man, saying to him, take heart, get up, he's calling you. And throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. And Jesus said to him, what do you want me to do for you? And the blind man said to him, Rabbi, let me recover my sight. And Jesus said to him, go your way, your faith has made you well. And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him on the way. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading of his word. Now, if you want to follow along with me, I do have a few notes on our website. Go to DetroitChurch.com, click on the Sermon Notes tab. You can kind of see a little bit where I'm going here. Bartimaeus was a popular dude, right? He wasn't popular, though, in our modern day sense of the word, right? He didn't have, like, some noticeable skill that everybody, like, adored. Like, if a superstar, somebody known for, I don't know, like a Stevie Wonder, who was a blind man, by the way, walked in here, we would all know it. Matter of fact, I might sit down and I might give him the mic. I don't know. Lord, help my heart. Help my heart. That's a bad boy, though, right? To sit and hear Stevie Wonder play the piano and sing. Excuse me? What? Bartimaeus was a blind dude, and he was popular. So again, my point is, blind people have a lot to offer. Anybody with any kind of issue have a lot to offer. So the reason why he wasn't accepted in society, again, wasn't just the fact that he didn't have anything to offer, but it was the mindset of the people in that culture that he was a nuisance. He was someone that could not take care of themselves. He was someone whose poverty, whose blindness led to their poverty, which led to their sitting on the road and begging. You ever been reduced because of a condition or a circumstance to doing something maybe outside of your character? You ever had to beg? I've never been in that situation. But I can imagine what that does to someone's sense of dignity, what that does to someone's sense of honor. Let me flip the script a little bit for our 2023 middle-class minds. You ever been irritated by someone who was begging? You ever had somebody beg something of you, and you had a thought like, why don't you just get a job? Why don't you just do this, that, and a third, right? Well, I've been there. I've definitely been there. This is the picture that we have of the crowd. Now get this. The scriptures tell us that Jesus, we know that he's on his way to Jerusalem. The disciples are following him. And get this, there's a crowd that is following them. When the scriptures use this word for crowd, the idea is that the number is too great to name. So there's a multitude that is following the disciples, that is following Jesus. Jesus takes the questions again that James and John has for him as an opportunity to shape their idea about what it means to be a servant. They're on their way to Jerusalem. What is going to happen at Jerusalem? Jesus is about to fulfill the very reason why he came. He is about to die on the cross as a ransom for many, for us. He is about to atone for our sins. He is about to settle the sin debt that we could not pay. So he is, for the third time, reminding and showing and revealing to his disciples his idea of what it means to have power. His idea of what it means to have privilege. His idea of honor is service. And as they're walking, they get to Jericho. Yes, that Jericho. That Jericho. This is a very significant city in geographical location on the journey and the scope of like God's salvific plan. Very significant. If I had more time, I would unpack that. But there's something that Mark wants us to know under the divine inspiration of the Holy Spirit in this occasion. Jesus recognizes there's a voice that is calling. He hears something. See, what insignificant does, it robs us of identity. It is a distorted and a dysfunctional view of the image of God when we allow the voices and the opinions of someone else to ring louder in our hearts and in our minds than what God has said about us. People cannot give us significance. Humans cannot give our lives meaning. Comes from God. You know, Oxford defines significance as the quality of being worthy of attention, of value, and of importance. I shudder to think about seeds that my poor behavior have sown in someone's heart. Thoughts of insignificance, because I don't know, maybe I overlooked them, I ignored them, or even worse, I hurt them. Intentionally or unintentionally. Significance, the quality of being worthy of attention, of value, of importance. What we see here in Jesus as the Son of David, the Messiah, our example of what it means to serve. He considered all humanity so valuable that he was willing to sacrifice it all for us. The Father, God, was willing to sacrifice the best that heaven had to offer for blind Bartimaeus, for you, for me. The crowd looked at Bartimaeus as insignificant. Matter of fact, they were annoyed by his cries. Now, I want to just unpack quickly this word there for cries. Verse 48, it says, and many rebuked him. The many is the crowd, right? So that's the crowd of people. So can you imagine this? They're walking on the way to Jerusalem. They're going through Jericho. The disciples are following Jesus immediately, and then the crowd behind them. And as they're walking, they hear this man crying out, and he cries out, Son of David, have mercy on me. This is the cry of someone whose society has beaten, battered so much where they feel insignificant. They feel invisible, unseen, unheard. Have you ever let out that kind of cry? Like, not even to people, like just to God. Let me unpack what this word cry means. In the Greek, it's the Greek word krezo. It means a strong cry of desperation with a loud voice. It means to scream. It means to shriek and to not spare. It is closely tied to the Septuagint version, the Hebrew version of that word, which is za'aka. Get this. This word appears frequently throughout the Old Testament. One of its earliest usages comes in Genesis chapter 4 in the aftermath of the first murder. Some of you may remember, some of you Bible students. And the first murder is when Cain, in jealousy, kills his own brother, Abel. And what do the scriptures say? That your brother's, God says to Cain, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. This is the same idea here of crying. He says, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. If you don't mind my shouting and yelling a little bit, this is worth shouting and yelling about, I think. If you've been in our city, you've lived in the city, if you've driven the streets of the city, if you've read reports about the city, then you have, I pray, as someone who is following Jesus, been like intuitively affected by the blood, the shedding of innocent blood in our city? Or have we become so familiar that we're unfamiliar now? This cry, this specific kind of cry is unique. And we see it also continuing in the Old Testament. There's an outcry. God hears the cry and the outcry of those in Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis chapter 18. Ezekiel chapter 6:49 tells us that this specific cry has to do with a neglecting of the poor and the needy. What does it tell us? This cry is a cry for justice. Like, this is a cry for God to make things right. This is a cry in recognition, in a visceral feeling that something is broken. I find in conversations with people, young and old, as they're wrestling with what is happening in our world, as they're wrestling with rumors of wars, as they're wrestling with all the kind of other ideas, in social commentary, they're wrestling with the brokenness of our world. And I find myself having to remind people, remember, that like the way we experience the world it's broken. The way things are not the way they're supposed to be. Our God is perfect, loving, and just. But something has happened. Now that something does not affect his justness, his love, his power, right? But something has happened that has shifted things. So what we see now, what we see in the scriptures, and what we see even taking place in our lives is God is working to restore all things according to the original plan and order that he has designed it. The scriptures call this shalom, welfare. It's the restoration of all things. But unless we can sit with the fact and acknowledge the fact that, no, the way things are not the way they are supposed to be. The economic crisis across the world, even in our city, the deception we see in many governments. We can speak locally, we can speak nationally, we can speak globally. This indulgence and preoccupation with money and power and prestige and capitalism. Again, those are all products of the brokenness. What we see that this cry here in the scriptures have to do with this cry for help and for God to come and make everything new. This is a cry for justice. Exodus chapter 2 tells us God also hears our cry for help. As the children of Israel are crying out as they are enslaved in Egypt, and they're crying out for their maker to come and make everything new. Come and redeem us and restore us. Some of the brothers and I, ladies, if you don't know, the men at Detroit Church, we have a group me application. We dialogue. Matter of fact, brothers, if you are here and not on that group me, see me, and I will get you in that. We're dialoguing this week about the tension between the brokenness of our world and how we as Christians are supposed to navigate that with righteousness, with truth, with salvation, both in a spiritual sense, but also how God would have us show up and work in a natural sense. And there's this tension that we often see with us church folk. We are either preoccupied with things that are spiritual, where we're in our prayer closet, on our knees, praying for the Lord to come, but not willing to be active and messy and get in the midst of the brokenness. Or we're so preoccupied with the brokenness, working to do what we can, oftentimes by the arm of the flesh, to fix the problem. And we no longer have this yearning, this cry that Revelations 22 speaks of the church, the Spirit and the bride say, come, Maranatha, come, Lord Jesus. You know what I'm saying? There's this tension between our longing for him to come and make everything new, and also for us to get into the midst of the brokenness and serve. And serve by laying down our lives. Psalm 34 speaks of this cry as well. The psalmist says the Lord is near the brokenhearted. He hears this cry of injustice against those who have been done wrong against. And God, family, God is just and is near and is holy. He's holy, and he responds to the cry of those who have been done wrong. He responds to the cry of those who have experienced the brokenness. And his response is as dramatic as the loud cries and shrieks of Bartimaeus. Please hear that. He doesn't just passively hear your cries. In his holiness and in his loftiness and in his other thanness, it's important that we have that high view of God, right? But please believe he's also one that Isaiah tells us that he came in the midst of the problem, rolled up his sleeves, and made himself to be intercession. By his own strong right arm, he intervened. This is what he does. There's been another lie that's gone throughout the church, that when we talk about issues of justice, that we are reducing the gospel to a social gospel. And my response to them is, you need a much broader view of what the gospel is. Perhaps our theology is too thin and not robust enough. When your God is a God of justice. Jesus is justice. And justice flows from the father heart of our God. He's a father to the fatherless. He's the defender of the widows. In his holy habitation, he comes near. If we can't conceive what that means for us in a city like Detroit, we have no business being here. And the Lord is in his kindness and his mercy and grace toward us, is allowing us to be, kind of comfortable in this space. Let me tell you something. This is the high end of the north end. We got Milwaukee Junction over here, with some nice businesses over here. Oh, look at Chroma. Shout out to Platform Miles. It's a nice little restaurant over here. It's real nice. You go a few blocks north, 8300 Woodward. If we cannot hear and not resist the need to tune out the cries that are a result of oppression, that are a result of the lies of insignificance, that are a result of the weight of perversion and distortion. You're going to hear them much more down there, just a few blocks north than you would do over here. I promise you that. Like we have to be a church that is outside, even when we get a building. We can't be so insulated. And the insulation doesn't come with four walls. The insulation comes with a mindset. It's a mindset. It's a mindset. So by the Spirit of God, my prayer is that that mindset will be exposed. Those lies will be broken down. But the response of those who feel insignificant is also to ignore the cries of those who are under that same weight and that same struggle. Here, Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you? Does that sound familiar? This is the same question he asked James and John. What do you want me to do for you? You see what Mark is doing? You see what the Holy Spirit is doing here? He's given us this juxtaposition of the hearts of those who are supposed to be the in crowd, who for the third time now have heard of Jesus' whole mission and plan, the reason why he's here. And yet they still cannot help but to respond in prideful arrogance, trying to cover their own futures. Where this blind beggar is asked the same question. And what does he say? Rabbi, let me recover my sight. Now, this isn't just a selfish, my need, I have this need. We see that in his earlier response. Again, he calls him Son of David. This has deep theological implications for this man, this blind man, to say this to him. Meant that he recognized him as the Messiah that was promised long ago, David's son, David's greater son, and the one who is God, and the only one capable of having mercy upon him. He recognizes the fact that he needs mercy. James and John are praying for significance, power. He's praying for mercy. We can define, it's been defined, mercy's been defined as God not giving us what we deserve. Means he knows he's a sinner. He's a sinner. God, have mercy on me. Listen, if you are struggling with this idea of a lack of, a wrestling with significance in your own life, or maybe if you are withholding that sense of significance and just giving attention to others, so busy with our schedules, so busy with all the things that we have to do, a simple prayer is, Lord, have mercy on me. Have mercy on me. I know that I deserve eternal damnation. I know that I have no ability in myself to heal myself. Lord, have mercy on me. I know that I miss it every single day. Have mercy on me, God. Have mercy on me. This is the blind man's prayer, and God responds to him. Listen, 52, it says, and Jesus said to him, go your way. Your faith has made you well. Listen, this word for well there is an interesting word. It's the Greek word sozo. This is the Greek word salvation, right? So what he's saying here is this faith has brought him not just physical salvation, but spiritual salvation. Salvation has both a physical and a spiritual dimension, and we see that here on display. And he says, immediately he recovered his sight. And he followed him on the way. He followed him on the way. What does that mean? It's that he made Jesus' way his way and became a follower. See, here we see the intentions of his heart. That there are many who Jesus healed, right? But they didn't follow him. They didn't follow him. They did not have his heart, and he knew it. He knew it. Early church tradition tells us that Bartimaeus would follow Jesus all the way to his passion, to his death. He saw him die, was a part of the early church, and became a prominent figure and voice in the church at Jerusalem. So as I close, I want to wrap this by kind of highlighting Detroit Church's core values. This is just how the Lord gave it to me. Our core values aren't just, something that we ask people to remember just so they can identify us, right? These speak to our motivations. These speak to our why. We have to always be willing to ask ourselves, why are we doing the things that we're doing? Why? Unless it becomes, so familiar that it loses its power, which is the definition of religion. And we have a lot of that in the church. Why do we come together and gather? Why do we do this today? Why are we seated like this? I'll tell you right now. This decision was made with a few people in mind. Primarily, Mrs. Jocelyn Moss, over there doing something. Jonathan and Tanisha Owens. I don't want to get in trouble naming names, but a bunch of other folk who are here every Sunday morning, a couple hours before we start, setting up. Rhonda, again, I'm going to get in trouble naming names, sorry. But you know who you are. This decision was made, we call it a stripped-down service, so that they can come and they can not be as active, but sit and hear and receive the word and be a participator. I thank God for their willingness to serve behind the scenes, oftentimes without being acknowledged, right? But they're part of our body as well. They're part of our body as well. I cringe to think about those who call themselves a part of this body who feel insignificant because their opinions, their place, their voice has not been valued. And the responsibility of that is not just on me. It's on us. It's on us. Father, open our eyes, open our ears to hear the cries of those who feel ignored. For those who feel unseen. For those who feel taken advantage of. What we see here, our first core value is belong before you believe. We see Jesus giving the marginalized in society a voice. When others ignored, he heard the voice. This is what it means. What we believe it means, what it represents to belong before you believe. Now, who is the unbeliever here? I would actually argue it's not as much Bartimaeus as it is the crowd. The crowd. The crowd is trying to get him to shut up. The crowd doesn't really want to hear his cries. The crowd is following Jesus, but their heart isn't there. They're following him physically, right? They're geographically on the road to where he's going, but they haven't yet learned what it means to follow his way. Bartimaeus does with a simple phrase. Our next core value is to see the unseen. This is what Jesus does. He sees the unseen. You ever like driven by something so much? Maybe it's a corner by your house. Maybe it's by your job. Maybe it's, particularly here in Detroit, a familiar intersection, building, place. If you're paying attention, you recognize it. And maybe it's blighted. Maybe there are people on the corner. Maybe there are all kinds of things. If you're really paying attention, it would move you. But we've just become so accustomed to driving right past it. Our eyes are no longer open to it. Our hearts are no longer sensitive to it. Listen, we can't afford to be in our city and be insensitive to these kinds of things. I've accepted the challenge to drive down difficult blocks, take different paths to get to certain places so that I can pray, so that I can ask God to sensitize my eyes. Give me your heart, Father, for our city. I don't want to be one who talks the right talk, but eventually gets tired of not being heard. I want to be like the prophets of old who cried aloud and did spare not. Far too often, family, we choose to hear the cries that we want to hear, and we ignore the cries that we do not want to hear. Our third core value was look up. Look up. Bartimaeus, the unseen, sees something. He's the blind man. He sees something that James and John, who were not blind physically, could not see, that they did not see. Yes, he did not have natural eyes, but he did have a yearning heart. And that's what it takes to see Jesus. That's what it takes to see him. A yearning heart. In Jesus, he sees hope. In Jesus, he sees grace. In Jesus, he sees a restoration of all things. In Jesus, he sees the marginalized being welcomed and given a home. In Jesus, he sees peace and shalom. Then our next core value, justice is an active, relentless pursuit. Listen, justice ultimately is rightness. It is God's commitment to making everything right. And please hear this. He's not just interested in like a new city without being interested in you having a new heart and living an abundant life. What does that mean? He wants to see rightness and righteousness fulfilled in your life, in our lives, family. He didn't come to die for city governments and systems. He came to die for people. Bartimaeus sees Jesus with a yearning heart. And Jesus sees Bartimaeus and hears his cries, and he gives him both physical sight and spiritual sight. And then our last core value, y'all should know it. Embrace the ultimate artist within. Embrace the ultimate artist within. Jesus here creates something out of nothing. Jesus gives shape and form and texture and significance, true significance to this man by simply recognizing him. I said it earlier, I'm going to say it again. True significance only comes from Jesus. I don't care what the culture has told you. I don't care what the church has made you feel. True significance, true meaning can only come from him. Have you been faced with something, a lie, a circumstance that has reduced you to begging, reduced you to feeling unseen or insignificant? I want to share with you this story as I close here about a woman some of you may have heard of before. Her name is Henrietta Lacks. Henrietta Lacks. It's a tragic story of a woman who had no idea the significance that her life had until, she never knew. She died without knowing. There was a New York Times bestseller book by Rebecca Skloot. It's called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. And she introduced Lacks to us and what she did for modern medicine back in 2010. Henrietta was an African-American woman that was unknowingly contributed to the scientific breakthrough in modern medicine. She died in 1951 at the age of 31, was a wife and a mother of 5. She was admitted to the hospital with symptoms. Eventually, she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. And what she did not know is that the doctors who served her unknowingly, not unknowingly, without her permission, collected tissue samples from her cervix without her consent. And these cells came to be known as HeLa cells, taken from her name, Henrietta Lack, Hela. Get this, they became pivotal in numerous medical advances. And for decades, her family did not know this. Her family was unaware of this. Her story embodies this systematic devaluation of African American lives or any marginalized people group. Her story highlights that and reminds us that even those who are looked at by society as marginalized or insignificant can still have immense contributions to areas like science and medicine. Her impact went on to make significant advances in research on cancer. Now, I love how Mark calls out Bartimaeus' name. Unless you read the other gospel accounts, you may not know this, but there was actually another blind beggar that was sitting next to Bartimaeus. But what Mark does, Mark not only calls his name out, but he tells us he was the son of who? Timaeus. Bar, son of Timaeus. Timaeus means honor. Timaeus means honor. Now, what Jesus does in reaching out and hearing him, he restores a sense of honor to this man that the culture, the crowd had made him feel insignificant. Now, this moment for me, years later, after I wrestled with this whole vertically challenged height thing, right? I was doing a study. I've mentioned this before, so some of y'all may remember this. I was doing a study on what my name meant, right? I'd always believed that my parents named me Marcellus, So yeah, my government name is Marcellus, not Sonny. They named me Marcellus because my dad's name is Ellis and my mom's name is Maria, right? So Marcellus. That's what they always told me. So they didn't know the real meaning of the word. I was doing some research. Actually, me and my wife we had this little hobby business we were doing back in the day. We were young. And helping people find like the meaning of their name. And the meaning of my name, Marcellus, actually means a short warrior. Are you kidding me, God? Like after years and years of longing for some inches to be tall, right? I just like, what's wrong? Like I literally used to think like something was wrong with me. That's the way I was made to feel oftentimes. And that lie just kept being repeated in my mind. And then I found that out. Like, wait a minute. Like maybe God, maybe this is bigger than just Ellis and Maria, but you had a purpose for my life. Maybe maybe it's a thorn in my flesh, right? I can't do nothing about it. But maybe it's for me to really understand where the real power lies. It's in Him, not in what people get impressed by. See, the scriptures tell us man looks at the outer, God looks where? And God also knew that I had another 5 even shorty that He had prepared just for me. Come on, somebody. Come on, somebody. Jesus redefines honor. He redefines, again, what it means to be Him for us. Yeah, James and John, they know He's Him, but they have their definition of what Himness means. Jesus gives them His definition. For Him, He's Him means servant. It means restorer of honor, significance. And He calls Bartimaeus by name. So family, I want you to know that if you've been called out your name, if you've wrestled with insignificant, that there is still hope for you. That Jesus is a loving God, and He hears the cries of His people. He hears the cries of those who call out for His name. For anyone who has hope, for anyone who wants to place faith in Jesus and looks to Him. That's your individual word of encouragement. For us as a people, Detroit Church, I pray that we will, with a deep sense of conviction and awareness, love those who society has called outcasts. I pray that we would be on the offensive about loving them. That we won't look at it as, well, I guess we're supposed to do this, so let me do it. That we will be intentional about looking for ways. And guess what? They come in all shapes and sizes. It's not just Detroit. They come in all socioeconomic statuses, right? They come in all educational, degrees, right? So it's not just what society looks at as socially elite. In Luke chapter 14, Jesus says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because He has anointed me to preach the good news, to bring liberty to the captives, and to give sight to the blind. That blind there is not just physically blind. It's those who are socially blind, spiritually blind. When He says to the poor, that word poor has to do with being bent over because there's been oppression built up on your back. This is the reality of our city and our times. So, where are the cries of the intercessors? Where are the cries of the warriors? Listen, intercession, I pray that your view of intercession is not just being in a prayer closet on your knees per se, although that's where it may start, right? But intercession has to do with getting in the middle of the problem, in the middle of it, in the middle of the mess. That's what Jesus has done for us. So, Father, this is our prayer. We hear our cries. There may even be those who have stopped crying because they are tired of being ignored, tired of feeling like they aren't heard, made to feel like their voice is not important. Father, I thank you as you've spoken to us, we're in this season of almost this intersection. There's a crossroad, so to speak. And we don't want to go forward like the crowds and even the disciples on the way to Jerusalem without understanding what it means to follow your way. We need your way, God. We need your way, Father. Father, I pray that the intercessors, those that carry burden, Father, of where we are supposed to be crying out about and speaking out about and calling out in the realm of the Spirit, I pray that they would be encouraged, that their voice would continue to go forth. Father, I pray that you awaken the intercessors, God, in this entire body, Father. That we would not look at prayer and intercession as just for a secluded special group, but that we would be a body of intercessors. I pray that you would open our eyes, God, to see others as you see them, Father. And I pray that our sense of significance would be restored, not because of what someone has said to us, but because our value and our image comes from you and for you alone. May we live for you. May we be a people like Jesus who see the unseen.